My fiancé tried to cut out my implant while I was asleep, so we could expand our family. I never imagined the man I planned to marry would betray me in such a horrifying way. I trusted him, loved him, and believed we were on the same page about our future. But one night changed everything. I woke up to a sharp, burning sensation in my arm. Disoriented and terrified, I found my fiancé hovering over me, a small blade in his hand. My heart pounded as I realized what he had been trying to do. He was attempting to remove my birth control implant while I slept. I yanked my arm away, shaking with fear. "What are you doing?" I gasped. His expression remained disturbingly calm. "We need to start our family, and you keep stopping us." At that moment, I knew the man I had trusted was not who I thought he was. And I had to get out before it was too late. I had always thought I knew my fiancé, and for the most part, I did. We had been together for 4 years, living a seemingly perfect life. We shared similar values, dreams, and goals for the future. But like many relationships, there were small cracks in the foundation that I chose to ignore. I had always been very clear with him about my decision not to have children at that point in my life. My career was just starting to take off, and I was focused on achieving my personal goals before expanding our family. We had discussed the topic multiple times, and he seemed to be on the same page. He understood my reasons for delaying having children, especially with my birth control implant in place. It was a responsible decision that allowed me to focus on my career, my health, and our relationship. But deep down, I felt a shift in him over time. I noticed his impatience when we talked about children. It was subtle at first, an extra long glance at the babies in the store, his comments on how much he loved his nieces and nephews. But then it started to escalate. He began to push harder, making comments about how we needed to start a family soon, how we were running out of time. I kept reassuring him that we were not ready, that I still had things I wanted to do first. I thought he understood. I thought he respected my wishes. But that night, when I woke up to find him trying to cut out my implant, I realized how wrong I had been. He was not the man I thought he was. I felt betrayed and violated in a way I could not have imagined. To understand how I ended up in that terrifying situation, we need to go back a bit. My fiancé and I had met through mutual friends. Our relationship started out as casual, but quickly blossomed into something much deeper. He was charming, thoughtful, and genuinely kind. We both shared similar interests, from traveling to fitness, and we supported each other through every milestone in life. We talked about everything, our childhoods, our dreams, our future, and we both agreed that we wanted to build a life together. After 2 years of being together, we got engaged. It was a dream come true. The engagement ring was beautiful, and we made plans for our future. At the time, the idea of having children was still far in the distance. I was busy with my job, and we both agreed that we would wait until the time was right. During that time, I made the decision to get a birth control implant, as it was the most convenient and effective option for me. I had always been cautious about my health, and I wanted to ensure that when the time came, I would be in the best possible position to start a family. My fiancé was supportive of my decision, saying that he trusted me and respected my autonomy. It was one of the things I loved about him. He never pressured me into doing anything I was uncomfortable with. But over time, things began to change. As the years passed, I noticed that he was becoming increasingly impatient about our family plans. The conversations turned from casual discussions about maybe one day to more urgent talks about when we would start trying for a baby. The pressure was building, but I kept reassuring him that we needed to wait. It seemed like a typical disagreement at first, but I could never have predicted where it would ultimately lead. The first warning signs came when I started feeling strange. It was subtle at first, occasional mood swings, irritability, and a few physical aches I couldn't quite place. I shrugged it off, attributing it to stress at work or lack of sleep. But when the feelings persisted, I started to wonder. Could it be something more? I went to the doctor for a routine checkup, and it was during this visit that I first learned something was wrong with my implant. The doctor explained that the device, which was supposed to last for several years, had stopped working properly. It was ineffective, and I was now at risk of becoming pregnant. This revelation hit me hard. I had trusted that the implant would protect me from an unintended pregnancy. I felt betrayed by my own body, and I struggled to make sense of how I had missed the signs. I was shocked, but I also knew I had to tell my fiancé. I was nervous, knowing that we had talked about expanding our family, but I had made it clear that I wasn't ready yet. I needed more time. But when I broke the news, I was met with an unexpected reaction. At first, he seemed supportive, offering to help me figure out what to do next. He said he understood that it wasn't my fault. But as the conversation progressed, something in his demeanor shifted. His tone became more insistent. He started asking me when I would go in to get a new implant or some other form of birth control. He wanted things fixed immediately. I explained to him that I needed time to process everything. I wasn't ready to rush into another solution just yet. But he wasn't having it. The more I tried to delay the conversation, the more frustrated he became. He wanted a baby, and he wanted it now. We've been waiting long enough. It's time, he said. I tried to calm him down, explaining that this wasn't something that could be rushed. I needed to make sure I was in the right mental and physical state before committing to such a big change. He wasn't hearing me. The argument escalated, and in the heat of the moment, he said something that stopped me cold. If you don't want a baby, maybe you don't really love me. Maybe you're just not ready to give me what I need. That stung. It hit me like a slap in the face. Here I was trying to protect my body, my health, and my future, and he was questioning my love for him. It felt like he was putting all the pressure on me, as if my reasons for waiting didn't matter. That night, I went to bed feeling drained and emotionally shattered. The next few days were tense. I avoided discussing the issue with him, but he didn't give up. He kept bringing it up, sometimes casually, other times aggressively. I was growing more and more uncomfortable, but I didn't know how to make him understand that I wasn't ready. One evening, I was getting ready for bed when I noticed something unusual. My fiancé had left his phone on the kitchen counter, unlocked. Normally, I respected his privacy and didn't snoop through his messages, but something about the constant tension between us made me feel uneasy. I picked up the phone and unlocked it, convinced I wouldn't find anything. But to my shock, I discovered a series of texts. It wasn't the messages that alarmed me as much as the content. He had been texting his best friend, discussing our situation, our argument about the baby and my reluctance to try for one. The texts were filled with angry rants about how selfish I was being, about how I was holding him back. But the worst part, he had been telling his friend that if I wasn't going to cooperate, he would do whatever it took to force the issue. At that moment, my blood ran cold. My mind raced, trying to process what I had just read. What was he planning? Was he really so obsessed with having a child that he would resort to extreme measures? My heart was pounding in my chest, and I couldn't breathe. I had no idea what to do with this new information. I spent the night wide awake, my thoughts spinning. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The man I loved, the one I trusted, was thinking of ways to manipulate and control the situation. I had always believed that we were a team, that we could talk through anything. But now, I felt betrayed. The next morning, I confronted him. I didn't hold back. I told him that I had seen the texts and read everything he had said about me. I wanted to understand why he would be so disrespectful. The conversation quickly turned into an argument, with him insisting that I had misunderstood and that I was being overly dramatic. But the more he denied it, the more I realized that his actions were intentional. It was then that he made a chilling confession. "I've been trying to find ways to get the implant out of you," he admitted, his voice cold and detached. "I know you don't want a baby now, but I can't wait forever. I've been thinking about cutting it out while you're asleep." My heart stopped. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The man I was supposed to marry, the person I trusted with my life, was willing to go to such extreme measures to get his way. I was terrified. My body went cold as the words hung in the air. I could not even comprehend what he had just said. "You were planning to cut it out while I was asleep?" I asked, my voice trembling. My fiancé, the man I had loved and trusted for years, stood there, staring at me like it was the most reasonable thing in the world. His face, which I had once found comforting, now appeared almost foreign to me. There was no trace of guilt, no apology, just determination. "Yes," he replied flatly. "You weren't going to get on board with it, so I was thinking of another way. I don't want to wait forever for a baby." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My mind raced, trying to understand why he would think this was acceptable. It was one thing to disagree about having a baby at a certain time, but it was a completely different matter to violate my body in such an intrusive and violent way. I tried to gather my thoughts. "You think you have the right to do that? To take control of my body just because you want something so badly?" I asked, my voice rising with anger and disbelief. He looked at me as if I was overreacting. "I thought you'd be on board with it if you just saw how much we both want this. I'm doing this for us, for our family. I don't understand why you're being so stubborn about it." That was the moment I realized that the man I had loved wasn't the man standing in front of me now. The fiancé I had known had somehow morphed into someone who believed that his desires outweighed my needs and my autonomy. His words, though masked in concern for a potential family, had an underlying message of control. He wasn't listening to me, and he wasn't respecting my choices. I started to feel the weight of everything crashing down around me. My trust had been shattered. This was no longer just about a difference in opinions on having children. It was about respect, about boundaries, and about control. I could not marry someone who was willing to betray my trust so severely. Tears welled in my eyes as I tried to make sense of the situation. The man I had planned my future with, the person I had imagined raising a family with, had shown a side of himself that was completely alien to me. It felt like a gut punch. How could I not have seen this coming? How could I have been so blind to the warning signs? I stepped back, putting some distance between us. I needed time to think, to process what had just happened. But as I backed away, he reached out, grabbing my arm tightly. "Where are you going?" he asked, his voice tinged with frustration. I pulled my arm away. "I need to think. I can't do this right now," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He didn't let go. "We need to figure this out. We can't just leave things like this. You don't understand how much I need this. It's not just about us anymore. It's about our future." I looked at him, my chest tightening with sadness and fear. "I thought it was about my future too," I whispered. "But apparently it's only about yours." That was when the full weight of the situation hit me. I had been so caught up in the excitement of our future, in the dreams we had shared, that I had ignored the little things, the subtle signs of control and manipulation. His fixation on having a baby at all costs had always been there, but it was never as blatant as this. I had made excuses for his behavior, but now I couldn't ignore the truth any longer. I walked out of the room, tears streaming down my face. I couldn't stand to be near him any longer, not after what he had confessed. I needed space, and I needed clarity. I called my best friend, pouring out the whole story. She was stunned. "You need to leave him. Now. This is not just about a baby. It's about how he sees you, about how he thinks he can control you. You deserve someone who respects you and your body, not someone who is willing to force his way," she said firmly. Her words rang in my ears, and deep down I knew she was right. But the thought of walking away from everything we had built together, the life we had planned, felt impossible. He was my fiancé. We were about to get married in a few weeks. How could I just walk away from all of that? As I sat on the couch, holding my phone, I realized that I had two choices. I could continue to ignore the red flags and go ahead with the wedding, hoping things would get better, or I could walk away and face the unknown. But staying would mean compromising everything I had ever valued: my trust, my autonomy, and my ability to make my own choices. By the time he came to sit beside me, I had made up my mind. He tried to apologize, but I could see it in his eyes. He was more concerned about losing me than understanding why his actions were so wrong. It was too little too late. "I can't marry you," I said, my voice shaking but firm. "Not after what you've said. Not after what you were willing to do." His face went pale. He seemed to be in shock, but deep down, I knew he was also angry. He didn't understand why I couldn't just get on board with his plans. I stood up, my decision final. "I can't marry someone who doesn't respect me. I thought I knew you, but I see now that I was wrong." He tried to hold my hand, but I pulled away. "Goodbye," I whispered, leaving the house that we had once dreamed of filling with our future children. As I stepped out into the night, I knew that the hardest part of this story was just beginning. Not because of what had happened, but because of the journey that lay ahead. The days that followed felt like a blur. The pain was overwhelming. The life I had imagined with him was slipping through my fingers, and the future that had once seemed so certain now seemed so uncertain. But one thing was clear. I could no longer stay in a relationship that made me feel small and powerless. I moved out of our shared apartment, taking only the essentials. I had to leave behind the life we had built together, but in doing so, I was reclaiming my independence and my autonomy. I needed to start over, to heal, and to rebuild myself. It wasn't going to be easy, but I had to do it for my own well-being. The first few weeks were difficult. I had always envisioned myself getting married and starting a family, but now I was alone. I felt like I had been betrayed, not just by my fiancé, but by my own desire to build a future with someone who had no respect for my body and my choices. The emotional wounds were deep, and they seemed to cut deeper each day as I reflected on everything that had led me to this point. The hardest part was the silence. We hadn't spoken since that night, and I didn't know if I ever would. He reached out a few times, sending messages and calling, but I ignored them. Each time, I reminded myself that I was doing the right thing, even though it hurt. It was clear that he didn't truly understand what he had done wrong, and I could not continue to live in a relationship where my voice was not being heard. But one day, after a particularly rough evening, I decided to respond. I was sitting in my apartment, scrolling through my phone, when I saw another message from him. He had been persistent, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. With trembling hands, I opened the message. "I'm sorry. I know I made a terrible mistake. I was wrong, and I need you to know that I'm trying to understand why it was wrong. I never meant to hurt you. Please, let's talk." I read the message several times, the words weighing heavily on me. Part of me wanted to believe him, to believe that he truly understood the gravity of what he had done. But deep down, I knew that his apology was not enough. I had given him so many chances to understand my boundaries, and he had ignored them all. I replied, my words carefully chosen. "I appreciate your apology, but I can't just forgive and forget. I can't go back to the way things were. The trust has been broken, and I need to move forward on my own." I put my phone down and took a deep breath, letting the finality of those words sink in. This was it. I was done. It was time to focus on my own happiness and well-being, no matter how difficult that decision had been. Over the next few months, I focused on healing. I threw myself into my work, spending time with friends and family, and rediscovering parts of myself that I had neglected in the relationship. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I needed to rebuild my life from the ground up, and I had to do it alone. Gradually, I started to feel like myself again. I started to enjoy the quiet moments, the ones where I wasn't worrying about someone else's needs or desires. I learned to trust myself again, and in doing so, I learned to trust my ability to make choices that were in my best interest. I found strength in the solitude, and it made me realize just how much I had sacrificed in that relationship. Eventually, I started to open up to the idea of dating again. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I wasn't in any rush. I wanted to find someone who respected me, someone who valued my opinions and understood the importance of trust and communication. I wanted a partner, not someone who would try to control me. And then one day, a surprising message came through. It was from my ex-fiancé, but this time his tone was different. There was no pressure, no demands, just a simple message asking if I would be willing to talk. I thought about it for a while, and after much deliberation, I decided to meet him. We sat down in a quiet cafe, and he apologized again, but this time it felt genuine. He admitted that he had been selfish, that he had been so focused on his own desires that he had ignored my feelings and boundaries. He had spent the past few months reflecting on everything, and he realized that he had lost someone he truly cared about. "I know I don't deserve a second chance, but I just wanted to let you know that I am truly sorry," he said, his voice soft. I looked at him, my heart still heavy but no longer filled with anger. "I appreciate your apology," I said slowly, "but I cannot go back to the way things were. I have changed, and I have learned a lot about myself through this process. I'm no longer the person I was when I was with you." He nodded, understanding. "I respect that. I really do." As we parted ways that day, I knew that I had made the right decision. The closure I needed had come, and with it, the knowledge that I had been strong enough to walk away from a relationship that no longer served me. It wasn't easy, but it was the best thing I could have done for myself. I had learned to stand up for my needs, to protect my body and my autonomy, and to trust myself again. I was no longer defined by my past. I was ready for a future that was mine to create. As time passed, I healed more, and the hurt from that relationship faded. I learned that I could move forward without carrying the weight of betrayal, and that I was capable of building a life that was truly my own. And with each passing day, I became stronger, more confident, and more certain that I had made the right choice. If you enjoyed this story and found it relatable, please like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.